All our stories are created for entertainment purposes only. Sometimes it's best not to spill the beans, you know? Some truths are just easier to keep locked away. But silly me, I decided to come clean to my hubby about an affair I had that lasted a whopping 8 weeks. And boy, did it backfire. I never expected him to react the way he did. It was like a nuclear explosion of emotions. My hopes were that telling him the truth might soften his heart a little, make him understand, and allow him to calm down. Instead, he did something I never saw coming. Hi there, folks, I'm Becky. Been hitched to my husband for 3 years now. Over that time, he's been buried in work, hardly ever home. Loneliness became my constant companion, and I started feeling like I was living on a deserted island in our own home. These past 3 years have been pretty gloomy, and I had envisioned a marriage where my hubby would be by my side, present and engaged. But alas, reality had other plans. My husband's name is Andrew, and he's a 28-year-old surgeon. You can imagine how demanding that job is. The man's schedule is nuts, with crazy long hours and even night shifts that spill into the next day. Some days it's like ships passing in the night. I hardly get to see him. Weekends? Well, they might as well be work days because he's often stuck at the hospital. Our relationship has taken a hit, and we hardly communicate like a normal couple. We've abandoned regular date nights and attending events together. Now, Andrew feels like a stranger, and our quality time has vanished into thin air. This isn't what I signed up for. It's definitely not what I had in mind when we tied the knot. I get it. His job is a big deal, and I'm not trying to be selfish here. But let me tell you, it's been a mental drain. I've tried everything to make this marriage work, even sitting down for a heart-to-heart with Andrew. All he seems to talk about is how demanding his job is. There was even a day when I waited patiently for my husband to return home so we could have a chat. But he quickly came up with an excuse, claiming he was too tired and not in the mood for a conversation. Yep, you read that right. Andrew said it. Me, just trying to have a decent conversation with the man I married, and it ends up making me seem like a nagging wife, someone who's always giving her husband a hard time when he gets home. It's almost as if I'm married to a stranger now, because the Andrew I knew is nowhere to be found. This is not the same guy I dated. Back then, he showered me with attention and all the care in the world. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not lacking in material comforts or anything like that. My husband works hard to provide for both of us, and we're financially stable. But you see, I'm still longing for his emotional attention. Money isn't everything, at least not for me. Andrew just doesn't seem to grasp that his wife also needs some TLC, the kind of attention he gives to his patients at the hospital. He's under the impression that everything's hunky-dory with me because I have all the comforts a wife could ask for to make her home cozy. But when was the last time we even went out together or attended an event like a regular couple? I remember going to a fundraiser all by myself once, feeling incredibly lonely as I watched other couples enjoying themselves. It felt like I was flying solo, and folks kept asking where Andrew was. I had to come up with excuses for him, covering for his absence. It happens quite often, and sometimes it makes me wonder if he's doing it on purpose or if there's something fishy going on. Maybe he's having an affair with a coworker, using his job as a smokescreen. Who knows? I even tried to throw a surprise birthday party for Andrew once. I invited some friends since our families live far away, but things didn't go as planned, and I had to rely on our friends to make it a memorable day for him. On the morning of his birthday, I did my best to wish him a happy birthday before heading off to work. We both woke up that morning, and I greeted him with birthday wishes, even singing a little birthday song to put a smile on his face. He seemed happy, and I could see a grin on his face as he left for work. Once he was out the door, I got to work on the party plans. I rented a hall, and with the help of our friends, decorated it to make it look festive. To add a personal touch, I baked a delightful cake for Andrew and arranged for all the food and drinks for the guests. I sent out a message to our friends, urging them not to spill the beans and spoil the surprise. Everyone cooperated, and Andrew remained clueless about the impending celebration. Everything was ready to roll. People started arriving at the venue about 30 minutes before the scheduled party time, which was at 8 o'clock. The saxophonist and the music band were all set, and everything was going according to my plan. All that was left was for the birthday boy, Andrew, to show up. The anticipation was building among the guests, eager to see the man of the hour. With my phone in hand, I decided to give Andrew a call to let him know about the surprise party. I explained that I wanted his 28th birthday to be a special and memorable one. My way of showing him just how much I loved and still loved him. Andrew hadn't always been like this. And it wasn't about his work. It was his attitude, the lack of attention that was taking a toll on my mental and emotional well-being. This all started when he got promoted at work. I'm not saying his promotion is a bad thing, but it's had its downsides. I barely see him at home anymore. So, there I was, trying to reach him on the phone, but for the first 2 minutes, his line was unreachable. I stayed patient and kept trying, feeling desperate to get a hold of him. After a few minutes of no luck, I turned to Andrew's close friend, Stan Lee. Stan and Andrew had been pals since childhood, and they shared a strong bond. I pulled Stan aside, not wanting to create a scene, and explain the situation. Andrew's phone was out of reach. Stan took it upon himself to help and dialed Andrew's number, but it still wasn't getting through. At that moment, my mind was flooded with various thoughts. I couldn't help but wonder if Andrew had chosen to celebrate his birthday with the woman he might be cheating on me with at some fancy restaurant. Meanwhile, I had been busy arranging a surprise birthday party for him. I got lost in my thoughts until Stanley suggested that I send him a text message and give calling him another shot. So I tried calling him once more, and this time it actually went through. I was thrilled because Andrew's phone was finally reachable. My excitement soared, and I anxiously waited for him to pick up. I kept dialing and texting, hoping he'd answer. But to my disappointment, Andrew didn't respond to any of my attempts. This only added to my frustration, and I was getting seriously ticked off. Stanley also made several attempts to reach him, but like me, he received no response. I noticed that the guests were starting to get restless and were asking questions about what was happening. It had been a whole hour, and there was no sign of the birthday boy anywhere in the hall. Stanley suggested I keep trying to call Andrew while he tried to calm down the guests. Somehow, he managed to convince them to stay a bit longer and returned to where I was. We continued our attempts to reach Andrew, but it seemed like he had vanished into thin air. It was a pretty awful situation, guys. I'm not kidding. I was utterly embarrassed. At that point, it was far from being funny. How could I invite my friends and Andrew's friends to come and surprise him, only for him to keep us waiting like that? It felt like all my efforts had been in vain. What was I supposed to tell all those people who had gathered there? The person for whom I had organized this surprise, my husband, was ignoring my calls and messages. I couldn't believe what was unfolding. By 9:30, Andrew was still nowhere to be seen. The guests, understandably, began to leave one by one, utterly disgusted by how I had managed to waste their time with a birthday party that the guest of honor hadn't even attended. It was one of those moments where I wished I could hide my face due to the negative comments and disappointment in the air. As the guests departed, it left only Stanley and me in the now empty hall. I felt deeply betrayed and furious about how everything had turned out. Stanley advised me to head home while he handled the situation there. I drove home with tears streaming down my face, crying my eyes out. I couldn't help but wonder what I had done to deserve such treatment. I kept asking myself why Andrew had suddenly changed. We used to be so different, so what had caused this shift? These thoughts swirled in my head as I drove home, my emotions in turmoil. Upon arriving home, I made my way to the bedroom, waiting for Andrew to return. A few minutes later, he came back and found me there, utterly distraught. He asked me what was wrong, and I inquired about his phone's whereabouts. My husband's phone wasn't on silent or anything like that, which left me puzzled. I asked him if he hadn't seen my calls or messages, but all he offered was an apology, stating he couldn't pick up calls or respond to texts at that time. There was no curiosity about why I had been continuously calling or any hint of remorse. That night, Andrew and I engaged in a heated argument. I expressed my disappointment and frustration about how I had gone to great lengths to plan a surprise birthday celebration for him, inviting friends to join in, only for him to ruin it. Andrew stuck to his usual excuse of being swamped with work, leaving me even more irritated. I eventually stormed out of the room, unable to bear the situation any longer. As the weeks passed, Andrew's late-night shifts grew more grueling. It was as though his profession was tailor-made for late hours. We stopped watching movies together, sharing meals, and following our usual daily routines. It felt like living in a state of turmoil. I had chosen to be a full-time housewife after discussions with Andrew before we got married. I agreed to it, but I never anticipated it would turn out like this. It was not the life I had envisioned, and I had no intention of continuing down this path. It wasn't that I had a problem with being at home and taking care of our family and household. What was truly frustrating was having a partner who didn't give me any attention or make an effort to spend time bonding as a couple. I couldn't even recall the last time Andrew had given me a gift. I was pretty sure he had forgotten our anniversary date. If he couldn't show up for his own surprise birthday party, there was no way he'd be present for our anniversary. I had reached a breaking point with Andrew's indifferent behavior, and I was fed up. The way I communicated with my husband had completely deteriorated. He wouldn't answer my calls or respond to any text messages, and when he came home late at night, having a conversation with him was next to impossible. This abrupt change drove me to seek attention elsewhere, and I ended up cheating. Yes, it's true. I cheated on Andrew. I started spending time with an old friend from college named Patrick. Patrick was a year ahead of me in school and was considered one of the most attractive guys on campus. One day, while scrolling through my Facebook news feed, I received a friend request from Patrick, which I accepted without any ulterior motives. We began chatting casually for a few weeks, sharing details about our daily lives. Our conversations deepened and we exchanged contact information. Patrick and I started texting and talking on the phone late into the night, and sometimes he would even come over to keep me company. What began innocently soon turned into a close bond, and we went on a few secret dates together. Yes, guys, Patrick knew I was married, but had no knowledge of Andrew, so we kept our relationship hidden. This continued for a couple of months, and it felt like I was rediscovering myself. I had almost forgotten that I was married because of how Andrew had treated me in the past. Patrick provided all the attention I had longed for. He noticed every little detail and made sure to bring a smile to my face. It felt surreal because I never thought someone could listen to me and give me the undivided attention I craved. I began to feel like Patrick might be the one for me. And slowly but surely, I pushed Andrew out of my mind. I never planned to cheat on my husband or do anything to harm our marriage. Andrew couldn't see how his late-night shifts and constant absence at night were straining our relationship. He couldn't balance his personal life and career, and yes, I held him responsible for it. I blamed him for choosing work over our marriage and for giving me less attention than he gave to his job. I didn't regret being with Patrick. It made me feel alive for the past few months. Last Friday, around noon, my husband Andrew returned from work carrying some bags, probably filled with items from the store. I was quite surprised to see him coming home early at that time, because he rarely does so in the afternoon. In fact, there were times when he wouldn't return until the following day. He approached me with the bags and handed them over, saying he got them for me. I looked puzzled and asked if everything was all right with him, to which he replied in the affirmative. Guys, Andrew had bought me a dress, a wristwatch, a bag, and a pair of shoes. He suggested that I try them on because he wanted to take me out for dinner. Yes, you heard that right, dinner. It was the first time in a long while that my husband wanted to take me out. I had lost count of the last time he had done so. This moment was bittersweet for me. It was bitter because I was already involved with someone else, yet sweet because my husband was finally making an effort to spend time with me. Andrew continued with this sudden change in behavior. He started taking me out, showering me with gifts, going on dates with me, and attending social events together. We began to spend quality time together, like couples typically do. He no longer came home late at night, and his night shifts became less frequent. On our anniversary, Andrew threw a surprise party for me and promised to make amends for the way he had treated me. I was genuinely happy to see my husband recognizing his mistakes and wanting to make things right again. I cherished those moments for quite a while, all the while realizing that Andrew had no knowledge of my infidelity. He was unaware that I had cheated on him during the times he neglected to give me attention, Now, you might be wondering what happened between me and Patrick, right? Well, not much really. Patrick and I continued seeing each other as we had been. I initially thought Andrew's change was temporary, but it persisted for months. He no longer worked on weekends, so we used that time to watch movies and cook together. I missed those days when Andrew and I would cook, clean, and do household chores together. Things were great back then. Andrew and I used to be so close, but that changed when he got promoted at work. He became too busy, leaving me feeling lonely and neglected at home. However, the past few months were a refreshing change as my husband finally started giving me the attention I had been craving for. We reconnected and bonded well during this time. On the flip side, Patrick, my affair partner, was growing increasingly demanding. He felt that I was giving him less attention and ignoring him ever since Andrew started paying more attention to me. Well, he wasn't entirely wrong about that. Andrew's newfound attention made me reflect on my actions, and I began to feel guilty. But then again, I couldn't entirely blame myself for the mess I had gotten into. I spent a lot of time contemplating the situation and decided that I needed to come clean with Andrew. I wanted to make things right by confessing that I had cheated on him with Patrick, my former schoolmate. The guilt was eating away at me, and I couldn't bear it any longer. I called Patrick and ended our relationship, explaining that I couldn't continue seeing him and that I wanted to mend things with Andrew. Patrick didn't take it well and persistently tried to contact me. I had to block his calls and messages and warned him not to visit me anymore, especially since Andrew was spending more time at home these days. A few weeks after ending things with Patrick, the guilt continued to weigh heavily on me. Andrew's presence and his complete unawareness of my infidelity were tearing me apart. I knew that if Andrew were to find out, it should come from me and no one else. I attempted several times to confess but was too afraid of how he would react. So I decided to wait for the right moment to tell my husband the truth. One day, while Andrew and I were sitting at home watching a movie, I mustered the courage to reveal that I had been having an affair with Patrick for the past 8 weeks. I felt really uneasy, but I noticed he was completely engrossed in the TV show and didn't seem to notice my nervousness. So, I mustered the courage to grab the remote and hit the pause button. Andrew was taken aback by my interruption and asked me what was so urgent that I had to interrupt his show. He sat down, facing me, and asked me why I seemed so anxious. After a deep breath, I finally gathered the courage to spill the beans about my affair with Patrick. As I began recounting the details to Andrew, I could see the shock and anger building on his face. His reaction escalated quickly, and he ended up hurling his glass of wine at the wall in a fit of rage. With each word I spoke, Andrew's fury seemed to grow, and he started smashing things around the room. I was terrified and felt the need to escape the escalating situation, so I fled the house and sought refuge with my sister Trisha. I poured out the whole story to Trisha, explaining why I had cheated on Andrew. At first, Trisha was furious with me for keeping such a significant secret from her for so long, but eventually she tried to calm me down. She suggested I call Andrew so she could have a conversation with him and hopefully help diffuse the tension. I made the call, but Andrew didn't answer and didn't respond to any of my messages. Trisha and I continued calling for about half an hour, but still, there was no response from my husband. My sister advised me to get some rest and said we could try reaching Andrew again in the morning. I woke up early and began dialing his number, and for a brief moment the call went through, but then it suddenly became unreachable. I kept trying, but it seemed like Andrew had blocked my calls and messages. I desperately wanted to talk to him and explain why I had done what I did, but weeks passed with no communication from Andrew whatsoever. So, Trisha decided to accompany me back to the house. When we arrived, we spotted Andrew attempting to get into his car to leave the compound. I rushed over to him, desperate to talk things out, but my attempts to communicate were futile. Andrew slammed the car door in my face and ordered our gatekeeper to kick me out of the premises before driving away. It was a devastating blow, and my heart shattered into pieces. How had I ended up in this terrible situation? Andrew wouldn't even spare me a second glance. At that moment, I felt like I repulsed him. Leaving with Trisha, my heart was heavy with sorrow. I couldn't bear the thought of returning to the place that was once our loving home. It seemed like my 3-year marriage was disintegrating right before my eyes and slipping through my fingers. I wished Andrew could see things from my perspective and understand that his late-night shifts, demanding work schedule, and lack of attention were pushing me to the brink. I wanted to explain how I had begged for his attention and silently suffered in his absence. Now I was beginning to regret coming clean and revealing the truth. How could he treat me this way after I chose to be honest instead of keeping him in the dark? But guys, this is just the tip of the iceberg because Andrew sought revenge, and it was a wicked and unexpected retaliation. I had no idea I was living with someone capable of such cruelty. Yes, it's natural for him to react strongly upon learning about my infidelity, but what he did was beyond anything I could have anticipated. His revenge shattered me completely. It felt like he had been planning this all along, waiting for the perfect opportunity to ensnare me. Perhaps he had suspicions and just needed confirmation, and I played right into his hands like a fool. This experience has taught me a valuable lesson, that's for sure. Several months passed, and I hadn't heard a word from Andrew. I was growing increasingly frustrated and determined to mend things between us. So I decided to pay him a visit at his place. When I arrived, the gatekeeper refused to let me enter the compound, as he had strict instructions from Andrew not to allow me in. I pleaded with him, but he remained steadfast. It was clear that Andrew didn't want me anywhere near the house. After a heated back and forth with the gatekeeper, I finally managed to make my way into the compound. I darted past him and entered the house. Surprisingly, the old passcode still worked, and I couldn't help but feel a wave of emotion as I stepped into what used to be my home. It had been so quiet, and Andrew was nowhere to be found inside, although his car was parked outside. I ventured further into the house, making my way to our bedroom, hoping to find Andrew there. Unfortunately, he wasn't. It seemed like he had left before I arrived in the neighborhood. I spent some time feeling sorry for myself before noticing that my side of the closet was completely empty. I initially thought my vision was playing tricks on me, but it turned out that I was seeing things clearly. None of my belongings remained in the house, which came as a shock because I hadn't had the chance to pack my things when I left hastily, fearing that Andrew might harm me. I had been borrowing my sister's clothes during my stay with her, and none of my bags, clothes, or shoes were left. Even my childhood photos and personal items were gone. The room looked as if I had never set foot in it before. I was taken aback, and I swear if Andrew had been present at that moment, I would have given him a piece of my mind. I had been hoping to find some clothes to wear because I was tired of relying on my sister's wardrobe. Andrew had really pulled a dirty trick on me, and I impatiently awaited his return. All the fear that had been gnawing at me just vanished, and I no longer felt intimidated by the idea of facing him alone. After waiting for what seemed like an eternity, constantly bothered by the gatekeeper who was worried about Andrew's reaction to finding me in his house, I finally heard the front door creak open. I rushed downstairs, thinking Andrew had returned. However, to my surprise, it wasn't Andrew I found at the door, but a tall woman. I was taken aback and asked her if she might be lost, as that was the only logical explanation I could come up with for a stranger being there. The woman actually chuckled and turned the question back on me, asking if I was the one who was lost. I was annoyed and demanded to know who she was. She introduced herself as Andrew's girlfriend, and for a moment I thought she was joking. But she wasn't. In that instant, my world shattered all over again. The realization that Andrew had a girlfriend crushed me. My mind raced with various scenarios, and none of them were pleasant. I couldn't help but suspect that she might have been the same woman he was cheating on me with. I might have been overthinking, but I was in no state to make rational decisions. The audacity of this woman astounded me as she told me to leave. I identified myself as Andrew's wife, but she was well aware of that. Then she had the nerve to tell me that I was soon to be the ex-wife. Honestly, I had the urge to confront her right there and then, but I managed to control myself. I inquired about my belongings and where she had stashed them. She admitted to getting rid of most of my things and selling the rest because Andrew had given everything to her, instructing her to do as she pleased. My restraint snapped, and I impulsively grabbed her shirt, my anger overtaking any sense of reason. I latched onto her hair and demanded to know the whereabouts of my childhood photos. She coldly informed me that she had burned everything. I was furious, and I swear I came close to pulling her hair right out of her scalp. She attempted to resist, but I had a significant size advantage, and she was too stunned to put up much of a fight. It's unbelievable that Andrew had the nerve to do this to me. How could he entrust a stranger with my possessions? How could he let a total stranger be in charge of my childhood photos? The clothes, bags, and boxes, while important, don't hurt as much as those pictures. Not even the jewelry and makeup can compare to the loss of those cherished photos. I lived with my stepfather and mother throughout my life because my biological father passed away before I was born. My stepfather wasn't the best father figure, and I eagerly counted down the days until I could get married and gain independence from that household. I had taken all my photos with me because I didn't want to leave any behind with them. That's why it stings so deeply that Andrew handed those pictures over to a complete stranger. No one can console me. Andrew was well aware of the sentimental value I placed on those photos, which makes his actions all the more hurtful. I had even discussed this with him in the past, so I know that he deliberately made that choice. As I struggled with the woman, Andrew entered the house. He rushed toward us and immediately separated us. Little did I know the gatekeeper had informed him of my presence while he was at work. I questioned Andrew about his actions, but he remained tight-lipped. He grabbed my hand and forcibly ushered me out of the house, instructing me to leave and never return. I was stunned that he had taken the side of a complete stranger without even hearing my side of the story. Tears welled up in my eyes as I couldn't believe what Andrew had done. I never expected such a heartless act from him. I inquired why he allowed that woman to destroy my childhood photos, and Andrew callously stated that he couldn't care less about what happened to me. I asked him if he was aware of the consequences of his actions, because his response would determine my next move. He confirmed that he was fully aware and that he had given the orders. In a fit of anger, I slapped him across the face, and he was taken aback by my actions. He later attempted to confront me again, but the gatekeeper intervened and restrained him from taking any further action. Nothing Andrew had ever done to me had hurt as deeply as this betrayal. How could he? My entire childhood wiped away. I left the house, and that's the last time I had any contact with Andrew. I decided to go to my stepfather and mother's house since my sister could barely manage to feed both of us. However, when I arrived, I was met with another shocking revelation. I found out that Andrew had a conversation with my mother and stepfather, where he spilled all the details about everything that transpired between us. This hit me hard because my parents are devoutly religious and have zero tolerance for infidelity or dishonesty. They weren't willing to take me back into their home after hearing what had transpired. My own mother even turned me away. I had low expectations from my stepfather as we were never close. But my mother's response truly surprised me. I left their house and returned to my sister's place where I shared the whole story with her. She offered to assist me, but I reassured her that I would move out in 2 months' time. It's been 2 weeks, and I'm currently exploring my options to get back on my feet. Frankly, speaking the truth didn't save me at all. It only brought me more misery and pain. I regret being honest with him. Maybe it would have been better to tell a white lie. This experience has made me cautious for the future. I have no intention of ever seeing Andrew again, and I'm planning to file for divorce. I've been waiting for him to initiate the divorce proceedings, but I haven't heard anything from him yet. Nevertheless, I'm determined to go through with it, and I'll definitely seek alimony or spousal support or whatever it's called. That man really did me wrong, and I intend to do what's best for myself. An update on my life. Being single isn't as glamorous as it's often portrayed. I'm not having as much fun as I initially thought the single life would be, LOL. Honestly, I never even expected to have fun in the first place. But I suppose maintaining a sense of humor helps me cope with the challenges I'm facing. For the first time in my life, I'm entirely self-reliant, and that's one of the most empowering feelings I've ever experienced. I was eager to leave my stepfather's house, so I got married quickly. But now that I'm on my own, I'm learning the true meaning of independence. I filed for divorce, and it was finalized within 3 months. Andrew and his lawyer offered me a fair settlement, and I'm now financially secure. As soon as my lawyer laid eyes on the deal, he strongly advised me to accept it. I suppose Andrew somehow realized the extent of the damage he had caused me. When it was all said and done, my feelings were mixed, a combination of both bitterness and relief. I bid farewell to my sister's place and secured a rental apartment for myself. I hold a degree in history, and now I'm gainfully employed, having recently received my first paycheck. Meanwhile, Andrew and his new girlfriend have been seen out and about frequently, with their pictures all over social media. It's a bit peculiar because he was never much into social media during our time together. Suddenly, he's become quite the enthusiast for sharing online. When Andrew was with me, he often claimed to be swamped with work. But out of the blue, he began making an effort to spend more time on social media. I eventually discovered that he intentionally started showering me with extra attention after his friend Stanley warned him about the possibility of me cheating if he didn't give me the attention I desired. He was afraid of being embarrassed after what happened at his birthday party and wanted to save face with his friends. Apparently, they had discussed the situation behind his back, and he wanted to avoid any further embarrassment. However, I've moved past all of this, and when Stanley tried to approach me for a conversation, I declined. I have no interest in him anymore and prefer to keep my distance. Andrew is now a part of my history, and I genuinely hope I never encounter such a person again. I may regret revealing the truth, but I'm also relieved that I did. It's a mixed bag of emotions, but perhaps everything that unfolded was destined to happen. So, that's where I stand now. I'm focused on my job and I make sure to get a good night's sleep so I can start my workday early.